by the end of this lesson, you should be able to describe what Node is and perform common Node tasks. Cool, so let's talk about what Node is. Node is a JavaScript runtime. Node is a JavaScript runtime. Node is a runtime for JavaScript. Let's talk about what that means. There's a second common runtime for JavaScript. Who can tell me what it is?
Is it Yarn?
Nope, good guess. Yarn is an alternative package manager for Node.
Is it jQuery?
Nope, good guess. That's a JavaScript library. The browser. JavaScript can run in two places. It can run in a browser, or if we run it outside of the browser, we say that we're running it in Node. So, let's talk more about what a browser is. All right, so a couple components to a browser. There's the thing where you type in the URL, and you've got these commands to go back and forth, and you have a settings menu, and you've got bookmarks and all that kind of stuff. That stuff is called, this is super confusing, it's called Chrome. Call that stuff browser Chrome. There are a couple of other things that are part of your browser too. One of them is your HTML and CSS rendering engine. So browser has one of these so that when it makes requests, gets back HTML and CSS, it knows how to turn that into a DOM, knows how it should visually render those kinds of things. That's the HTML and CSS rendering engine. So take a look at this timeline for a sec. These are like the common, let's see if I can get that in there too. These are like the common rendering engines. Who made them, how they're supported, that kind of stuff. So if you use Chrome, your rendering engine is called Blink. Came out in 2013. If you're on Firefox, like me, you use Gecko. They've been evolving that since 1998. You use Safari, you're using WebKit. They're completely independent projects, and this is important, they don't have anything to do with the browser Chrome. So when we go to like, can I use, and it shows us all these different browsers, like, can I use Fetch? There are all these different browsers. They don't all use different rendering engines. Like Samsung did not make a browser. Samsung made some browser Chrome, and Samsung Internet like uses, I'm relatively sure they use WebKit. So you can take these engines, slap your own Chrome around them, and you're in the browser business. Cool. There's also a JavaScript engine. So this is the part of the browser that is running your JavaScript. It's the runtime for your JavaScript. And likewise, there's a bunch of different ones. So these are the common ones right now. Google's is called V8. IE used one called Chakra. They just got rid of it. That's the big difference. You might have noticed that like the Microsoft's Edge browser like went Chrome. That's what they mean. Is they stopped development on Chakra and now they use V8 to run their JavaScript exactly like Chrome does. SpiderMonkey was the old one for Firefox. It was the original. Firefox made a new one from scratch called Quantum. That's what Firefox uses now. So similar kind of thing. You grab a JavaScript engine, you grab an HTML and CSS rendering engine, you develop some browser Chrome, and you have developed a browser. Questions about how this works in the context of a browser?
Would you mind just describing what the Chrome is again?
Yep. It's everything in the browser that isn't these two things. So these tabs, the URL bar, the forward and back button, I can click on home and it takes me to a page. This whole plugin ecosystem, all these like settings that I can do, all that stuff is browser Chrome. Doesn't have anything to do with rendering HTML, and it doesn't have anything to do with running JavaScript.
So it's anything that's not the window and not the search bar, pretty much, or the URL bar.
Oh, the URL bar is also part of the Chrome.
So are they called Chrome extensions because they're extensions of the Chrome part of your browser, not because of Google Chrome?
No, they're called Chrome extensions because they work on the Chrome browser. You can't use the Chrome extension on Firefox.
That's what I thought, but was checking.
Firefoxes are called add-ons.
Are all of these engines open source?
That's a good question. I don't think so. V8 is. Chakra almost definitely isn't. Quantum almost definitely is. SpiderMonkey like definitely is. JavaScript Core is almost definitely not.
Do they all read JavaScript code differently, like different manners?
Kind of. That actually brings up a really good point. Separate from all of this stuff is JavaScript. JavaScript is a language. It's a specification. These different JavaScript engines process this language in different ways. A good example of that is what features you support. So when ES 2015 was coming out, had all these cool new JavaScript features like classes and rest and spread and for of. And so these were all of those features and whether or not they had been built out in which versions of which browsers.
So is that why, like, for example, I had like a button on one of my apps that like worked really well on Chrome, but on like Firefox, it would like render differently?
Yes. If it was rendering differently, that was because the rendering engine rendered it differently. If something worked in one browser but didn't work in another one, that's probably the JavaScript engine either not supporting a feature that you were trying to use, or supporting it but with a different syntax, like that kind of stuff. Because like there's a standards body that comes out with these things for JavaScript, like rest and spread and for of and class, const and let. And they go, cool, here's how JavaScript should work. People need to be able to like program the engines to use that syntax. That's a completely separate task. It's easy to declare that the language should work a particular way. Quite another thing to actually program a browser to be able to understand that new syntax. So that's why we get different support in different browser engines. And so usually what we're shooting for is, if I'm running this JavaScript, there's always going to be some stuff that isn't supported. It's too bleeding edge. It only works in Firefox. It only works in Firefox and Chrome, but doesn't work in a Microsoft browser. Like that stuff always happens. So what we're trying to do is, for our like publicly releasable stuff, we want it to be the stuff that, yeah, is like pretty much in all of the modern browsers. And that's just a matter of time. Like they literally have to code the ability for the engine to handle that. More questions about Chrome, rendering engines, JavaScript engines.
Are there browsers that would have like the same HTML, CSS rendering engine and a different JavaScript engine?
Yeah, it happens all the time.
What
So,
about vice versa?
Yeah. So like, for example, WebKit is a rendering engine that's used by Safari and Opera, both use that. But Opera almost definitely uses Gecko as its rendering, as its JavaScript engine, and Safari uses JavaScript Core. Likewise, Microsoft still uses Chakra as its rendering engine, but uses JavaScript's V8 engine for JavaScript. Or shit, not Chakra. Shit, I got that backwards. Oh, is it just? It's just called Edge now. Their rendering engine. Oh, there you go. Yeah, Edge HTML. Other questions about how these three puzzle pieces fit together? And these things talk together, they're integrated, but they're also just Legos. So for example, Edge recently ripped out Chakra and put in V8. They didn't even rename the product to like my parents, same browser. Cool. So there's that excellent question about whether these things are open source. Well, V8 is, which is what enabled an enterprising Ryan Dahl in, I want to say 2012, to take V8 and rip it out. Said, hey, so the only place we can run JavaScript is in these JavaScript engines and browsers. It's a Lego. So what if I ripped the JavaScript engine out of Chrome and just made it a standalone like command line program? So we could just run JavaScript without needing to be tied to this concept of a browser. Just make it a general purpose programming language. He did, and he called it Node. Node is the JavaScript engine from Chrome ripped out of the browser and running all by itself. Let that one sit for a sec.
So like it is literally the same engine? Okay.
Correct. It is. Where is it? There you go. It is that. And I was like, wow, this is super duper fast. So they ripped it out and made Node and Deno out of it. Deno is Ryan Dahl's like attempt to fix all of the things that he thought he did wrong with Node. It's not going anywhere.
Wait, so since they pulled it specifically from Chrome,
Yep.
does that mean it has any difficulties with the others, like other JavaScript engines?
So, like, we've separated it out of the browser entirely. It doesn't have anything to do with browsers anymore. So it doesn't need to be interoperable with anything. I'll give you an example. So if all right, so I have my console open over here, and I can do 1 + 1, cool, comes out. I can just write whatever JavaScript I want in here, and the quantum engine for Firefox will process that, poop it out onto the screen for me. This is me basically directly using the engine, but it's still in the browser. If I wanted to just write some code, I would need to open up like a blank browser window and start writing whatever code I wanted here. I can do whatever I want, some function that like I can just write JavaScript, that's cool. But I have this needless concept of like a browser that's sort of tagging along. Meanwhile, I can make an index.js file, do that same thing. It's still JavaScript. There's nothing Node special about it. I just wrote some JavaScript in a file. And now I can use Node to run that file and see the output. Now it's not attached to a browser at all. Now I can do just general programming shit with this. I could run this on a robot. I could run it on a cron, which means that like I tell my computer to run this file every hour with Node. Think about like your command line apps from Mod 1. I could write one of those in Node. No browser needed. That's Node.
So Node is the creation of text editors, like Vim and VS Code?
Say that again?
So Node was essentially the beginning of like text editors like Vim and VS Code?
Oh, no. So Vim goes back to the 80s, and it was an updated version of Vi, which is from the 70s. All this stuff happened like 7 years ago.
Oh.
So, but like Vim could be written in Node now. That wasn't possible before. Before Node, you couldn't have used JavaScript to write a command line utility. Vim is written in C++. And like a lot of those like command liney kinds of things, like Ranger, like this is a command line tool. It was not possible to write a little tool like this in JavaScript until Node.
So before Node, JavaScript is basically like imprisoned in like web browsers and web applications.
Ding, 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 ding. Yes. Node is the liberation of JavaScript from the browser.
So does it get all of V8's like updates and upgrades, or now that it's Node, has it like branched off to its own thing?
That's a great question. Yes, it gets all of like regular V8 stuff. It's downstream from it.
Is there a spider monkey version of Node?
Nope. And I'm not entirely sure why, but the only other attempt at doing something like this is Deno, which is also Ryan Dahl and also used V8.
So if you visit an app on your browser that uses Node, does that mean that the browser's JavaScript engine like won't be used and it just uses Node, or can it be both?
Ooh, so let's tear apart that statement a little bit, because we're right on the cusp of something big. Okay, so we know about this. So our HTTP request response cycle. We also know that a client can only run HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Server can be Rails, can be Node, can be Python, could be whatever. I was talking about Elixir Phoenix, which is something that is perpetually like almost on my list of things that I'm going to learn. It's never going to I'm never going to learn that goddamn framework. So part of the selling point of Node is that I used to only be able to write JS here, and in both ways. I can't run Python in my browser. I can't run Ruby in my browser. I can't run any other programming language but JavaScript in my browser. But by ripping JavaScript out, now I can write JavaScript here and here. One language, both sides. But Kelsey, to your question, like my client, the entire design of client server stuff is my client not only like doesn't give a shit what language the server is using, it doesn't even know. It's communicating through HTTP. It just gets HTTP stuff back. It doesn't know how it got it back. If I had a Node API and I switched it over to Rails, there's no way the client would even know that. So this JavaScript here and this JavaScript here don't have to synchronize. They don't talk to each other. There's nothing they need to know about each other. All they need to be able to do is send and receive HTTP messages. That's their Rosetta Stone. That's their lingua franca. One thing that we might have talked about a little bit in Mod 3. If we didn't, well, you're growing up. It's time for you to learn. There's another box in here. Call this an API server, and we call this a file server. File server is way simpler. All it does is keep files and give them to you when you ask, like Google Drive. So when you go to a URL, you're asking for an HTML file from the file server, it gives you the contents of that file back. Your rendering engine starts trying to put that together. Along the way, you might also find CSS files. Cool, give me that one too. Oh, also there's this JavaScript file. Yeah, I'm gonna need that.
So is that like Firebase?
Yeah, exactly. Firebase is a static file server. Amazon S3 file server. So we keep all these files on here. We ask for the files. This is also using HTTP. Here's an HTTP request for this index.html file. All right, cool, here it is. It gives you the contents of those files back through HTTP. And then this rendering engine in the browser parses through that and tries to make it show up on the page. It's also going to ask for a JavaScript file. Cool, I'm going to give you the contents of that JavaScript file back on the page. That's going to get worked over by the JavaScript engine and may include things like, yo, can you make an HTTP request to this API server for me that's just running whatever, doesn't matter. Something that can access a database, something that can control a robot, something that can read a temperature sensor, just general programming stuff. We don't know, we don't care. All we care is that we get an HTTP response back. Node is, hey, you know how you really like writing JavaScript over here? Well, you've never been able to do it anywhere else. So how about you take the language you're already super good at over here and use it to make APIs and stuff also.
So, struggling, I guess. Is it just more cost effective to use Node as opposed to trying to make requests to the to an API, a third party API, or?
So this is an alternative to Rails, Django, PHP, like that kind of thing. And so, like, if I can rephrase your question, why did we need another one? We already had those. Why do we also need JavaScript for it? And so the reason is that I can use my expertise in the language, because remember, it's the same language, it's just running somewhere else. I can use my expertise in this language to help me out on this side. I don't have to learn another language if I don't want to. And also, there are some like very practical benefits that Node has over Ruby, over Python, over lots of other ways we can build servers, in part just because it kind of came last. And so it was able to learn a lot from how these other languages and frameworks and what have you approached making APIs.
Is Node considered object-oriented programming, or is it still in that JS area?
So it's still the JavaScript language, all the ups, all the downs. And so just like regular JavaScript, browser JavaScript is sort of OO, it's sort of functional, it's sort of procedural. It's kind of whatever you want it to be. So that's also the case in Node, because it's the same language. It's just a different thing running the language.
So are there servers beyond an API server and a file server? Anything else in this picture here?
Yes. There's all kinds of different servers. Like the abstraction, the big picture thing is a server is somebody who answers requests. An API server is you ask me for data, I give you data. File server is you ask me for a file, I give you a file. Who can think of another example of a server that we need?
A WebSocket server?
Yeah, totally. So like, it's kind of like a subtype of APIs, but similar kind of idea. So it wouldn't be like an HTTP API server, it'd be a TCP API server. That's a socket server.
And are there ways?
Like the entire time you've been on the internet. It was in the news 4 years ago. email server. So I send a POP, which is like another protocol, just like HTTP. I send a POP request to this email server, and it sends an email to another email server. And then I can send another POP request to read the contents of an email on that server. It's examples of servers. Full stack web development. These are the two you're going to work with 99% of the time. APIs and file servers. So you correctly picked up on this being Firebase. This would be like Heroku. Also, this would be like Rails S. And this is like Light Server. Give you another picture. I take some JavaScript. And I can put that JavaScript into a browser engine, or I can put it into Node, and then the output on that would probably be something on a web page. This is probably going to be something on the command line. Or really, Node can be just about everything. It's general purpose programming, not only for stuff that goes on web pages. Browsers have like one purpose, just make web pages show up. We can also use programming language to do all kinds of goofy shit. You can program a thermostat, you can program a robot, you can program just your computer to do automated tasks, like broad, abstract programming. Node lets us do that with JavaScript too.
Okay, so we've got JavaScript for the browser, which is the JavaScript rendering engine, and then we've got Node, which is JavaScript rendering engine, just sort of freestanding.
Yep.
That gets used for API servers.
Mm-hmm.
Any other is there a version of JavaScript for the email servers or for the WebSocket servers? Or?
Not especially. There are libraries that will let us do sockets with JavaScript. That's what Jay was playing with in the last mod. But and you could, since it's general purpose programming, yeah, I guess you could write an email server with Node. You can do anything that you can do with programming, you can do with Node. So it may or may not make sense to, but you could.
So I guess I'm kind of struggling with how do these things communicate with each other? I mean, does there have to be some sort of specific program written so that something will understand Node? Or
Node is, you can think of it like a program that's running on your computer. So check this out. If I did index.rb, oops. So I write some Ruby on here. And I can do Ruby index.rb. And also do node index.js. Same kind of thing.
So what is the Rails version in Node? Is that Express?
That's Express.
Okay.
Like Rails isn't the only API framework for Ruby. There's also Sinatra, which is pretty shitty. It's why we skipped it in your program. There's some other ones. Likewise, in Node, Express is the most popular by far, but there's other ones. Koa is kind of popular. There's a Rails knockoff for Node called Sails that sort of sucks.
So just to make sure I got it right. So Express is to Node what Rails is to Ruby?
100%.
Okay. Even though Rails takes like a ton of files and Express doesn't?
They have opposite approaches to solving the exact same problem. So like a Node server, like if I was going to make an API in Node, check out how easy this is. So I'm still here. I see you guys.
Okay.
So if I wanted to make the smallest Node server that I could, it'd be like an API server. I can do it in one file, the entire thing. If you make a GET request to the root, respond with JSON and listen for requests on port 4000. Ta-da! If I install Express, which is like, it'd be like a gem install. If I do a gem install Express, and run that file that I just made, which again, not a whole lot to it. That's the entire server. I can run node index.js. If I go to port 4000, cool, I got some JSON back. Exact same like problem that Rails is solving, but does it in a hyper minimalist way. This is the router, the controller, the the model. It's just kind of all boiled down to its essence.
Does it lose some functionality because it's so minimalist, or is it still perform exactly?
That's a great question. It can do all of the same things. It gets a lot more verbose, though. You could say that it makes it easier to do something that's not usual. And I think that's accurate. Also, sometimes you have a server that doesn't need to do that much shit. It doesn't connect to a database. I'll give you a good example. So if you go to kylecorbally.com and you fill out my contact form, that goes to this app. This is the entire app for it. If it's a post request, connect to SendGrid, pull out the email address and the message from the form that they filled out, have SendGrid send me the shit, and then fire back these headers to the thing that was asking for it. 31 lines. In Rails, that would be like 31 files. Ask me more questions about what Node is.
So how does a package manager interact with Node?
Oh, thank you, Lynn. Alley-oop. So Node has a package manager that comes with it, which is also like, there's a few things that are just straight across the board improvements to just having the JavaScript engine. The engine's one part of it, but also we get things like the package manager, which is it's kind of caught some black eyes recently, but I still think that NPM is the best package manager out there. Way better than Ruby's, way better than Go's, better than Deno's. Like NPM rocks. Better than PHP's for sure. So package manager is a way to like share code with people. So for example, you guys may have heard me talk about Lodash before. Lodash is a collection of utility functions. For example, this is a function that just gets rid of all falsy values in an array. You might have reason to do that. I end up using this one all the fucking time. Subtract an array from an array. There's no just like regular way to do that in JavaScript. It's not hard to do. You can write a function that'll do that, or you can just take somebody else's. Just a collection of code, like a gem. So what NPM lets us do is just like gem, lets us just install it on a project. So I could do something like npm install Lodash. It goes and gets all that Lodash code for me. And now I can say, cool, why don't you give me compact out of Lodash? And so I want to compact that down to just true, true. Cool. That's how easy it was to use somebody else's code. And I like this way better than gem. You run into so many fewer like bizarro versioning bullshit problems because it keeps all of those, all of the files for that stuff in the same folder that you're working with, in this node modules folder. And so if I look in that node modules folder, there's Lodash, there's compact. This is the actual function that I was just calling. That's nice.
Did I see it correctly when I was doing installs with like Create React apps yesterday that Lodash comes with React?
Yep. It's used in React. Which brings us to probably the last thing. And the reason that we're talking about Node and we're using Node with Create React app, even though, weird, this is all client stuff. What does this like Node API shit have to do with any of it? So your browser only understands HTML, CSS, and JS. Period. The end of story. Doesn't understand JSX. It doesn't know what like a lot of this stuff that we're trying to write in these files is. Doesn't know how to import a CSS file. Are you kidding me? That doesn't make any sense. So we use Node as a pre-processor for these files. Let's take a look at what that could look like. on my personal site, I have these templates. Every talk on my webpage follows a template, like these things. If I have a video, show the video. If I have links, show the links. Like put the date of the thing here. So all that stuff is in this handlebars template here. It's got some conditionals. It's got loops. It's kind of like HTML. It uses HTML. My browser doesn't understand handlebars. So what I did is I wrote a Node script that takes this template and takes a JavaScript object, looks for a key called talk, looks for a key of that called title, and then just like swaps this out for whatever is in that object. That's a general purpose programming task. And Node does it. When I run npm run build, check this out. It runs all these little Node scripts that builds out my site and turns that into an HTML file, an HTML file, an HTML file, a single CSS file. Like I wrote this in, a dozen different SCSS files. Well, shit, I want those to be one file and it needs to ultimately be a CSS file. Cool. I can write a Node script that chews all those things up and poops out a CSS file. It's just general purpose programming. Could have done that with Python, could have done that with Ruby, could have done that with anything. Did it with Node because I like JavaScript.
Can we see that script?
Yeah. So this is the compiling the templates. Actually, this one might be better. I'll look at the other one. Okay, compile the templates. Just a whole bunch of JavaScript here, promises the whole damn nine. And so I made this for the index. I want you to use this template, and I want you to make these two variables available. When I look at the index, that index template, saying, cool, give it the page of home and an is home of true. Oh, actually, I know where that is. That's in name. So I can use those variables here. Is home. But my browser doesn't know how to deal with this. So I have this script that will read in a file, use the handlebars npm package to like turn it into HTML, and then write that HTML back to a file. Can't do that in a browser. Can't read files in a browser. Can't write files in a browser. Can with Node. To create all those little talk HTML files, I read in the template. I map through all of my talk data, which is just JavaScript objects, these. Go through each one of those, and then take the template, swap out all the little placeholders for these objects, so that's valid HTML, write that back to an HTML file. Process talks, create talk files. So for us, when we use create React app, I mean, check this out. If I go create React app, some app, so even this, create React app is an NPM package. It's just JavaScript. So you can put it on NPM and I can install it. Same way I brew install things, the same way that I gem install things. You could totally brew install create React app, but since this is just JavaScript, I can put it on NPM instead. Better. Create
It's
React.
not fair that yours loads that fast.
Well, I was installing it. Some React app. All right, so then it's like installing these packages and showing me these updates on the screen and making all these files and stuff. That's JavaScript that they wrote all of that with. And it's running with Node. No browser in sight. And so I get to write my JSX, I get to write all this stuff that my browser couldn't run. And then Node is gonna swap this for this and swap this for this and swap this for this and poop out HTML, CSS, JavaScript that I can actually run in my browser.
Is Ranger just for Vim?
No, Ranger is a command line utility. It's not Vim specific. It uses Vim keys, but you can use it with anything. It's a lot easier than CD, LS, CD, LS, CD, LS. All right, so it gave me this some React app. So it gave me all this stuff. This is not valid JavaScript. If you try running this in your browser, it's going to barf. But if I run the magic create React app node script with npm run build, it's going to go and swap out all the parts that my browser can't run and give me an HTML file, a CSS file, like it's all jammed together, but all of that is just regular valid CSS and a JavaScript file. Also all jammed together on one line, but this is what your React app is. And so when you end up deploying this site, that's the stuff you're deploying, not your JSX, not the thing you wrote. Node turned the thing that you wrote into a thing that your browser can run.
How long is that one line?
Real damn long. So this is just the boilerplate, and it's 1,500 characters long. Doesn't even do anything yet. Ask me more questions about Node.
How can our browser read when we run npm start?
Your browser doesn't. So this, okay, so this is my React app. My browser can't do shit with this, but that build folder that I made that has my HTML and CSS and JavaScript, check this out. I could go into that folder, run light server. If I go into that build folder, which has all of my all the things that Node turned into HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, What do you know? It's my React app. So my browser doesn't know shit about how this app got built. All it does is see this HTML, CSS, and JavaScript that Node pooped out. And when you run npm start, what you're doing is just that in real time, all fancy like. So I can do npm start, and it's going to build those files and make them HTML and CSS and JavaScript and make them show up on the thing. And if I change any of the files, it'll reload my page in real time. It'll rebuild all that stuff. But my browser isn't reading JSX. My browser isn't reading anything other than than HTML, CSS, and JavaScript.
Is npm build just something you do just like kind of at the end, just to kind of solidify everything?
Exactly. So, and here's the explanation for it. So it's a slow as fuck build because it does that live reload. It also gives you like all these like detailed error messages. And when you run npm run build, it strips all that stuff out so it runs faster.
Is there a reason why you use require at the top of your JS files rather than import from?
Require is part of Node and it predates import export by like 5 or 6 years. They wanted something like that for browser JavaScript. And so that's where import export came from. And now Node is starting to use them also. There's upsides and downsides to them. They do the exact same thing, but they do it in just a different enough way to be fucking annoying. But require is technically still the official Node one.
Can you break down how express, connects, and objection work together in maybe like an analogous way to the Ruby stuff?
So express talks to objection, which talks to connects, which talks to your database. Rails talks to active record, which talks to your database. Active record is objection and connects in the same time.
So forgive my ignorance, but what exactly are objection and connects?
Don't worry too much about it right now. If you're going to make an Express API, objection is your replacement for active record.
Okay.
So you can do things like dog.all.
Okay.
But yeah, very specific to making APIs. All right, so we're running a little bit long. Didn't get to the node task one. What I'd like you to do on your way out is write me your best description of what node is. Let's take a couple minutes for it. Sorry, Damon. I want your best description of what node is. Let's take 3 minutes, and then we can keep that going in our DMs too, and hopefully clear up anything that isn't popping. 3 minutes. Give me your best description of what node is. Slack it to me. Another minute. All right, Slack me what you got. Enjoy Damon's lesson. Cheers.
Thanks, Kyle.